this is John for MTG Nexus coming at you with another budget deck brought to you by Foz for his friend. As a friendly reminder, if you like what you're seeing on the channel, please consider subscribing, giving us a thumbs up, leaving a constructive comment down below. And if you'd like to see your deck played, a donation of $15 sees your deck played in the league. This, however, is a bit of a different project. This is a series of decks that one of our big contributors, Ryan Foz, has graciously donated for us to play for his friend. His friend's trying to get into Modern. We're playing out a series of different decks that might pique his interest. Well, whether you're interested in aggro or mid-range or control or a combo deck. This is another aggressive deck similar to the budget burn deck that we played, except it goes a little bit bigger. So this is somewhere straddles the line between what you call an aggressive deck, which is a deck that's just trying to get your opponent dead as quickly as possible, and a mid-range deck that plays a little bit more to the board and is a little bit more controlling. This one controls the board more in terms of its size and sheer strength of its creatures, as opposed to the red decks, which are playing small, fast creatures and then finishing the game up with some direct damage spells. What this deck is trying to do is it's trying to get on the board with creatures like Experiment 1, which is a 1/1 that every time has this mechanic called Evolve, that every time a creature that has greater power or toughness comes into play, it gets a +1/+1 counter. Pelt Collector, very similar in what it does. It's a 1/1 that grows as you play bigger guys. Then there's this thing called Land of War Elves, which is what they call a Mana Accelerator. A Mana Accelerator is something that lets you cast spells ahead of what you would normally be able to land-wise. This one happens to be a 1/1 for a green that the turn after you play it can tap for a green mana. Beyond that, you have Avatar of the Resolute, which is a 3/2 creature with keywords Reach and Trample. Reach means that it can block flyers, which ground creatures normally can't. And Trample means that anything, whenever it's blocked, if its power is greater than the toughness of the creature blocking it, then that damage can be assigned to either the planeswalker or the creature that you're attacking with it. Strangle Rootgeist is a 2/1 with haste, which means it can attack a turn it comes down, and Undying, which means if it happens to die, it comes back into play with a +1/+1 counter. Seer Farron is a 2/2 with a special ability that whenever it attacks, you can choose another attacking creature you have to add its power and toughness, basically +X/+X, where it's the power of this card whenever it's attacking. You can do different things with this deck to increase its power, which we'll get into in a minute. Ronos the Indomitable is 2 and a green for a 5/5, which is a pretty good deal. However, the downside is it can only attack or block if you have a creature with power 4 or greater, which is not unheard of in this deck, especially in the mid to late game. Also has a special ability of 2 and a green. Another target creature gets +2/+0 and gains trample until end of turn. This ability can basically be activated at any time, which helps to grow and turn on the Ronos. Steely Champion is a 5/4 for 3 green. The reason it's so powerful is the fact that it's difficult to cast with triple green, but since we're an all green deck, pretty easy for us to do. It also has a nice ability of your opponent's creatures with power 2 or less can't block it. So makes it really hard for your opponents to just chump block this all day. And then finally, we have Yorvo, the Lord of Garenbrig, that comes into play with 4 +1/+1 counters on it. And then whenever another green creature you control comes into play, you can put another +1/+1 counter on it. And then if somehow that creature's power and toughness is greater than Yorvo, put another +1/+1 counter on Yorvo. So Yorvo has the chance to get out of hand really big, really quickly. So the other thing this deck is playing is it has a lot of what you call combat tricks. So as opposed to burn spells, which interact with your opponent's creatures, combat tricks tend to interact with the cards you're playing. Aspect of the Hydra is a very powerful one. Basically says target creature gets +X/+X end of turn, where X is your devotion to green. So basically, for each pip of green mana that's on your board from your permanents, not your lands, the creature you target gets +X/+X. So this is like, say you have an Experiment 1, a Strangle Rootgeist, and a Steely Champion. That's 6 pips of green mana. That means whatever creature you're targeting gets +6/+6. Insane value for that thing, especially if you're trying to deal that last bit of damage and your opponent hasn't blocked a particular creature. Blossoming Defense gives your creature +2/+2 and gains hexproof. This is mainly used as a way to protect your creatures from opposing removal spells, but can also be a way to pump extra damage. Binds the Vastwood is very similar. It costs 1 green, shields your creature from being targeted, but also has the kicker, which means you can pay an extra green mana to give your creature +4/+4. So in addition to protecting your creature, you can also give it +4/+4 for 2 green mana. Rancor is what they call an enchantment. This is something that comes into play at sorcery speed during your turn. Allows you to attach it to a creature, whatever creature you happen to be targeting. Its ability is it grants your creature +2/+0 and trample. So basically the same ability that I talked about on Avatar Resolute. Allows you to assign extra damage beyond the toughness of the creature. So if you're attacking with a 6 power creature, your opponent blocks with a 2 toughness creature, you can assign the 4 damage to them, or the 4 excess damage to them. And then in the main deck, the extra things, you have a pile of forests, which are the basic land for the green archetype. You have a land called Hashap Oasis, which is a desert. You can play 1 and 2 green and sacrifice a desert, which this is the only desert you have in your deck, to, at sorcery speed, give a creature +3/+3. So if you happen to be drawing a lot of lands, it kind of gives you a way to kind of mitigate that flood a little bit. Also, does cost you a life to use the green mana on this, so it's not as free as the forest, but the extra utility is kind of nice. Nurturing Peatland is what they call a canopy land. So canopy lands are lands that, tap for mana, usually 2 different colors. This one's black and green, the only one we're interested really in green other than a particular sideboard card we have. And then you can pay 1 and sacrifice it, tap it and sacrifice it to draw a card. This once again helps to mitigate the idea of drawing too many lands in your deck. And finally, there's what they call a man land, or a land that has the ability to transform into a creature itself. Usually the downside of these lands is they come into play tapped. But this one, Treetop Village, can tap for a green, so it's like a tap forest. Or you can pay 1 and a green and turn it into a 3/3 creature with trample. So it gives you, once again, a little bit of ways to mitigate flood in a deck that otherwise doesn't have a ton of ways to mitigate. Flood being a term to mean you're drawing too many lands and you're not drawing enough spells, pretty much. Sideboard, you have 2 copies of Dismember. So Dismember is a black card, but has this ability with that little symbol that's right here instead of your normal black mana symbol. It's called a Phyrexian mana. That means you can pay 2 life or a black mana to cast this spell. So in our deck, being green, you're basically playing 1 and 4 life to kill one of your opponent's creatures. Usually you bring this in matchups where you need to get an opponent's creature out of the way, or they have a particularly problematic creature for our deck. Damping Sphere is an artifact that you play on your side of the field. Basically, if a land would produce more than 1 mana, instead of producing whatever mana that deck was going to produce, it cast for 1 colorless instead. So there are some decks in the modern format that tap for multiple mana. It's kind of a way to shut them down. Then there are also decks in the modern format that try to play a bunch of spells in 1 turn, and this makes that more difficult. It's a symmetrical effect, so it can affect us a little bit as well, but basically it puts a tax on each additional card each player is trying to play each turn. Shaper's Sanctuary. This is not a way to protect our creatures, but a way to recoup things if our opponent's targeting our creatures with removal spells. This allows us to draw a card every time our opponent targets one of our creatures with a spell. Collector Oof is what they call a hate bear. So bears are, in Magic's history, are 2 mana 2/2s usually. This one has the unique ability of artifacts, so the archetype like Damping Sphere, that have an activated ability cannot activate them. Basically that means if they have any type of cost associated with them to use their ability, they can no longer use them. So this is good against certain decks in the modern format. Weather the Storm. This is a card primarily for, very similar to what we were playing last time in Budget Series. Any type of red deck or any type of deck trying to deal you a bunch of damage. Weather the Storm for 1 and a green allows you to gain 3 life. But it also has this mechanic called Storm. So what Storm does is for each spell that's been cast during that turn, you put a copy of that spell on the stack once the Weather the Storm has been cast. So say your opponent's played 5 spells, you put 5 additional you play the 6th spell, you get the original copy plus 5 additional copies on top of the stack. So you would gain 18 life in that case. Kind of backbreaking against a red deck that's trying to go from 20 to 0 as quickly as possible. And finally we have Force of Vigor. Force of Vigor is a unique card. I'm curious why Foz chose this particular one. But Force of Vigor is basically 2 and 2 green, destroy up to 2 artifacts or enchantments. Also has an ability that when it's not your turn, so during your opponent's turn, you can exile a green card in your hand to cast this without paying its mana cost. This allows you to destroy, things like Damping Sphere, Rancor, or other problematic things. There are certain things that this deck can't beat. There's a card out there called an Ensnaring Bridge, which keeps you from attacking if your opponent has less cards in hand than the power of your creature. There are some other very powerful effects, very similar to how Leyline of Sanctity helps to shut down burn. But that is the deck tech for Mono Green Aggro in Modern Budget Series. Thanks to Ryan Foss, and let us get into some matches. We're back for the first match with Mono Green Mid-Range Aggro. This hand's pretty decent. When you're evaluating an aggressive deck, you want to look for its mana curve. 3 lands is a lot, but we do have 1 drop into a couple of 2 drops, which is nice. So we're definitely keeping. Opponent is mulliganing, which is nice for us, because the less resources our opponent has to work with, the better off we are usually. Opponent plays a Swamp, and they're playing a discard spell, which means they get to take a card from our hand. Probably they will take Experiment 1 to break up our curve, but... So it looks like our opponent is on a mid-range or a controlling deck. Alright, we probably draw another 1 drop, so... You always want to get the 1 drops out first, if at all possible. And then we want to lead on Sheer Farron. Okay, I think what our opponent takes here. Yep, means... I'm going to play our creature pre-combat to grow our Pelt Collector. Fortunately, we don't get a counter on the avatar itself, but, Well, it looks like they're a mono black deck of some kind. Fortunately, Ghost Quarter is going to answer Treetop Village. This isn't a land on our opponent's side of the battlefield that has the ability to answer. Sure. I'm going to hold Aspect of Hydra to be able to fight through Murderous Rider potentially. Hopefully that's like the only play our opponent's got. So we get to have a really good turn here. It's kind of awkward. I would love to play this other Treetop Village's turn, but in order to have all the mana we need, I need to do this. And then we want to make sure that we leave up the 1 mana for Aspect of Hydra so we can attack with everything here. Opponent knows that's going to draw that out. Alright, and we got the win. Nice. So our opponent is a removal heavy deck, which means we definitely want these Shaper Sanctuaries. And then beyond that, the only other card we would maybe consider, opponent doesn't really seem to have any artifacts. They're not really a deck trying to deal a bunch of damage. Haven't seen any artifacts or enchantments out of them. The only other card we would consider would be Dismember. Dismember's a fine card, but I think we're just going to go with that. I'm actually going to board out a couple of the aspect of Hydras, even though they were pretty good there, because our opponent is trying to take apart our strategy. An aspect of Hydra is best when your opponent's not really removing your creatures from the battlefield or taking your cards out of your hand with what they call discard spells. So this hand's fine. Depending on how much discard our opponent has. Nothing. Alright. So, even though I want to get my creatures on the battlefield, I'm actually going to play Shaper's Sanctuary first, because this means our opponent's removal spells will draw us cards. Alright, Blossoming Defense is a nice one. Play Experiment 1. Play Pelt Collector. Hope our opponent doesn't have some style of sweeper here. Crucible of Worlds. Alright. So, Avatar here. Blossoming Defense. Crucible Worlds notably doesn't really do a whole lot in this matchup, but could be trying to like Ghost Quarter people here. Karn, sure. Snaring Bridge would be very unfortunate. That's probably what they're going to go grab. Yep. Alright, Runus is not a terrible draw here. Depends on how many cards our opponent can get out of their hand. I'm going to attack this one at Karn so our opponent can't get any more cards, and then we're going to attack these guys at the opponent's face. And hopefully they can't empty their hand. Sure. Play another card. Sure. Alright, we might be locked out from playing the rest of this game. Let's just go to the next game. Opponent's playing a weird brew themselves, so playing a mono black control deck. So we're going to want to bring in the Force of Vigors just to have outs to that card in Snaring Bridge that got us a little bit there. And then beyond that, is there anything we wish to bring in or take out? Bring in the Force of Vigor just to be able to answer that stupid bridge. This hand is pretty bad. We have 5 lands, so I think this is a mulligan. This hand isn't great either. So, mulligan again. This hand's okay. Put back. That's in one of these. Sheeper Sanctuary out there. I guess to Inquisition us. So one of the downsides to the mono green strategy specifically, or monocolored strategies in general, is you're generally limited in what cards you can play. So the reason we mulliganed the second hand was a bunch of lands and 3-drops just aren't fast enough. And unfortunately, our 5-card hand with a discard spell just probably isn't going to be quite good enough against whatever our opponent's got going on. So we're going to lose our creature and our protection spell to this Collective Brutality. Creature, attack with our elf. See, when you're playing a more aggressively bent deck, you really don't want to be dealing your opponent damage for the first time on turn 4. It's generally not a good thing. Sure. That's another artifact that's kind of rough for us. Maybe we should have brought in Collector Oof expecting that. This one has the activated ability stuff that I was talking about. Sure. Opponent removing our Avatar of Resolutes from our deck. Sriracha Bomb is a artifact that basically allows you to put counters on it over each turn, and as you do that, whenever you sacrifice to blow it up, it gets rid of all permanents with a converted mana cost of whatever the charge counter's on. And since we have all one converted mana cost creatures and a one mana permanent, we're just going to get completely hosed by that card, unfortunately. Sure. Continues to just let the Creatures peck away at their life total, and we continue to draw lands. This is what I meant by the term flooding out. It means we're basically drawing all lands and no actual spells. Yep, there's that Karn. Probably gonna go grab an Ensnaring Bridge. Yep. No, we have outs to it in our deck, but it's pretty much gonna be a good game. We finally force them to blow the bomb. Yep. Unfortunately, we don't have anything else going on, so our chances of victory are looking pretty slim here, unfortunately. Yep. Okay. Much fun as that is, our opponent was once again playing a brew. So, unfortunate to lose there, but opponent has control of the game. And basically what they're doing is they have this thing called Psychogenic Probe. Basically anytime a spell or ability causes a player to shuffle their library, Psychogenic Probe deals 2 damage to that player. And they're playing a bunch of effects like Surgical Extraction, Extirpate, and such that force players to shuffle their library. So that's looks like be their kill con here. So, okay, on to the next match. Back here for the second match with mono green aggro, mid-range smash, whatever you want to call it. Unfortunately, we're on the draw again. So the big thing about aggressive decks is aggressive decks generally want to be on the play. They want to dictate the pace of things. Alright, so we're keeping mono green. Okay. So our opponent is on an Arbor Elf. This is a mana Accelerator. So we're going to want to get our Held Collector out. Opponent is untapping their land. Let's see what they have here. Opponent is blowing up our land. That's not nice. Alright, so I guess we play True Top Village here since we can't actually cast anything this turn. I could potentially hold up Aspect of Hydra or Blossoming Defense to protect from a removal spell here, but swear. Yep. Possible I should have left up. Guess of the Moon. Kind of actively annoying because, like, now we can't cast anything with this Treetop Village. Normally, Magus of the Moon's not particularly good against our deck full of a bunch of forests, but, you know. Opponent's got a big 5-drop here. Glorybringer. Game's going to end pretty quickly here. I guess to smack us for 6. And even if we can cast one of our big guys next turn, we can't protect it from Glorybringer's exert ability. Right. I guess theoretically Experiment 1 keeps us alive for a turn. Using Blossoming Defense to do things, but I don't think it's going to win us the game because Glorybringer attacking by itself is enough over 2 turns. Block the moon here. We get a 2. I'll play another elf. So we have a chance, but we really don't because we really have to kill our opponent in like 2 of our turn cycles before this Glorybringer untaps, and I don't think we just have that capability. I'm go ahead and attack with this. Because if taking 1 damage from an elf is kind of whatever, and their red decks struggle to remove creatures of 4 power or greater usually. Stomp. Yep. Alright, so we're up against a red deck. So the removal is okay. We could bring in Shaper's Sanctuary, but their deck doesn't actually tend to have all that much removal, so I'm going to bring in the 2 Dismembers to deal with things like Glorybringer. Beyond that, once again, could go down Aspect of the Hydra. Blossoming Defense and Rank Binds are kind of necessary. I think we just go down a couple of Aspects of Hydra. Alright, so swap in, swap out. Happen to run into someone who is a fan of the channel, so basically when you're sideboarding with these style of decks, you really want to minimize the amount of cards you bring in, you bring out. You do need to react to your opponent's strategy on some regard, but at the same time, you want to keep the core of what your deck is trying to do together. You're trying to go 1-drop into 2-drop into 3-drop, or some combination thereof, of just like curving out, which is a term which means using all your mana every turn to get your opponent as dead as quickly as possible. While it's not quite the same as the burn deck, it's trying to emphasize a lot of the same strategy. You're trying to get your opponent dead as quickly as possible before they can expend all of their resources to stop what you're doing. Alright, so our opponent is on a deck they call Gruul Midrange, which is the color combination of red and green. This hand is interesting. So if we happen to draw a land, or our Land of War Elves doesn't die, this hand is very good. I think we're going to keep this hand. So we're going to lean on the elf, because we need the mana. Hopefully it doesn't die. Okay. Once again, hopefully our elf lives. If it does, we're in good shape. If it dies, okay, it looks like it's living. At least for this turn. Okie dokie. Experiment 1. Once again, we're really dependent on drawing lands or a mana dork living. We do have 20 lands in our deck, so that's on the lower end for a deck trying to cast 3 drops. But because we have the mana accelerator, you don't want to put too many lands into your deck. So, let's see what our opponent does here. Another Utopia Sprawl. Into Anger of the Gods? Question mark? Yep. Looks like Anger of the God. Nope. Just blow up our land, sure. We didn't need that anyway. Alright, so bring out another Experiment 1. Don't think we're in good shape by any stretch, but you know, at least we have people on the board, right? Hmm. 4 mana. Bolt your dude. Let's see, Pyromancer. Yep, that's a problem. 2/2 is a king in the land of the 1/1s. Okay, we kept a bit of a speculative hand on the back of Mana Dork and hoping to draw some lands. We didn't, and now we're stuck with a bunch of uncastables in our hand. Hit. Opponent just starts picking off our dudes. Yep. I guess we go ahead and attack here. Sure. Alright, we're not drawing anything, and our opponent's just got a superior board, so. Once again, the hand was a bit speculative, but, you know, I think it was a perfectly keepable hand. We'll go ahead and play one more match with this deck. Back for our third and final match with budget mono green aggro mid-range. We're on the play, which is obviously nice. One of those one land or elf hands again. I think we're going to go ahead and keep it once again, especially on the play. That's really hard to pass up, but could be risky. Risky for the bisky. Ruh-roh. No. Hopefully we'll draw land. Once again, his hand was predicated on the elf, and the elf died. Land? Nope. So we play Pelt Collector. Pass the turn. Opponent is some type of blue-black control deck, potentially. Okay. They are a deck called Fairies. Alright. So, we lead on the creature that does not have haste first. So we'll evolve the Pelt Collector. Opponent has played an enchantment that basically says every turn during their upkeep they get a free 1/1 at the cost of 1 point of life. During their upkeep, they get this trigger on the stack. Get a free 1/1. Okay. See what our opponent does here. They'd like to play things at instant speed in reaction to what you're trying to do, so decent chance they'll have some response here. Okay, it's unfortunate. Gonna hazard a guess they're going to hit Serafen. Yep. So we're gonna go ahead and attack with Strangleroot Geist here. Because if they block it, it's fine. So that'll come back as a 3/2 and grow the Pelt Collector in the process. Make it more difficult for them to block Pelt Collector profitably. So against this kind of deck, what do we have? Basically have the Shaper Sanctuaries again. Dual land that comes into play tapped because they don't have a fairy to reveal. Alright, that's a nice one. So I think I'm going to play another Strangleroot Geist here. Yeah, spell Stutter Sprite the whole time. Nope, just Main Lake. Okay. Go into attack here. Awkward, because if they have Fatal Push, we get blown out, but I still think we make the Aspect of Hydra play. Alright. Get that out of the way. It continues to make some 1/1s for free. Well, relatively free. double block here. I think we have to let that go, unfortunately. Might get punished for kicking this if they have mana leak. Yep, looks like they have mana leak. Okay, opt-in response, sure. Venture creatures coming in handy for our opponent. Play this creature post-combat. It's at 3 life now. Put a Rancor in the graveyard and a Forest. And our opponent concedes the game. Alright, so once again, we're interested in Shaper Sanctuaries, as our opponent's doing quite a bit of targeting of our creatures. We could bring in Dismember, because they do have quite a few creatures in their deck, but they're more trying to kill all of our creatures, so I don't know if that's the proper strategy. Force of Vigor we could potentially bring in to answer Better Blossom, which can be an enormous pain in the butt, but I think for now, once again, Shaper Sanctuary is out, a couple copies of Aspect of Hydra. Or Shaper Sanctuary is in, couple copies of Aspect of Hydra out. And then beyond that, we're just trying to get our opponent dead as kind of quickly as possible. 1 drop into 2 drops and protection spells seems pretty reasonable. At least as reasonable as it can be against a deck chocked full of removal. Removal spell. Nope. Looks like you have an opt or something. Yep. Once again, they're a deck that tries to play in response to things a lot of times, so. Questioning, should I be playing Seer Farron here, or I guess we just jam this guy. Spell Snare, yep. It's a spell that specifically only counters things with 2 converted mana cost. So, for 1 blue mana, so they get to trade up on mana at the cost of a very specific card in their hand. Why would they fetch Island? Figured they would fetch Watery Grave. Seems like this is going to be the summer of a stink bug. It's the second night in a row we have a stink bug in our room. Okay. Love to draw a third untapped land here. Blossoming Defense. Now we're left with a bit of a conundrum, but I still think we have our own Outstanding Lordgeist here. It could have like another counterspell or Snapcaster Mage. Sure, that's fine, I guess. Don't know why they waited to main phase that. Like, if I were to draw a third land, they get blown out so badly. Okay. So, Collective Brutality, it looks like. Oh, Tasker. Well, that's an interesting one. So we'll just play Avatar of the Resolute here. Outsize us on the battlefield with their 4/5. Also has the ability to potentially draw them cards, so kind of scary stuff. Has an activated ability that says put the top 2 cards of your library on the battlefield and return a non-land card of your opponent's choice. Really? Alright, let's put a Rancor on that and see what their response is. Okay. Do you have a second one? Kind of a risky play, obviously, but, you know, had to go for it. I think the longer this game goes, the worse it gets for us. That's enough. Opponent is a heavy removal control deck that's just trying to keep us from doing our thing. I'm more inclined for Dismember after seeing Tassiger. Once again, maybe going down over these Aspect of Hydras because that gets blown out by removal so badly. Aspect of Hydra is more for situations where you're trying to absolutely race your opponent or outsize their creatures, not necessarily against a deck heavy on removal. Keep. I think we're going to lead on a Treetop Village and then go Treetop Village into Collector potentially. Now, the odd part about the Fairies deck is that sometimes they play hand disruption spell, so not playing Shaper Sanctuary on one can actually be a detriment to us. So maybe I'm supposed to go... we'll just gamble if they don't have a discard spell on one. Most of their permission can't stop 1-drops on turn 1. Of course, you have a discard spell. Thoroughly punished. I take Geist. Interesting. Alright. Fortunately, we can't cast Ronus next turn, which is probably the most likely turn it would be to resolve. This is a card that they would have huge problems dealing with once it's on the battlefield. Alright, that's not terrible for us, I suppose. We'll do attacks first. Oh, the spell stutter sprite. Yep. At least we didn't get 2 for 1 here. And we just jammed Ronus here, right? Pump up all the guys. Okay. Sure. It's a sweeper, unfortunate, but that's life. Couple of dorks. Ronus can't attack because we have a creature with 4 power 4 or greater. Sure. Counter spell or removal spell. Kind of get blown out this turn, but you know. Unfortunately, that means it goes to our graveyard. At least we drew another threat. No sense in attacking with Land War. They'll probably just block with Thing in the Ice. Pump that up. If they have another removal spell, they have another removal spell. It's getting really close to flipping that Thing in the Ice. And they have a Spell Snare. Yay. At least we finally get to attack. Might be a little too late, but we at least get to attack. So do I risk my opponent having a counterspell in their hand? All right. Woo! We actually got a win. Nice. Keep pressuring our opponent. Keep pressuring our opponent, and they couldn't draw enough answers. So, one of the nice things about Ronus is Ronus just stays in the play through most removal spells and through sweepers. So if you ever, like, he's always on the battlefield, kind of. So, you know, he's kind of an ever-present threat, and that kind of carried us through here in this match. So, be back in 1 second with a quick wrap-up. So, the big takeaway from this deck is it's a different style of aggression than the budget burn deck. As you saw, there's a lot of different strategies out there in Magic. You know, we saw a kind of a prison-y mono black artifact deck in round number 1. Round number 2, we saw a Gruul mid-range deck, which is doing a lot of the same things we're doing, only they go a little bit bigger. And then we ran into a blue-black controlling fairies deck, which is a sub-theme of the archetype in there. Spellstutter, Sprite, Bitter of Blossom, you know, basically creatures that are of the Fae archetype. We're able to get the win in that matchup. So, you know, this is a fairly solid aggressive deck. It's a little bit on the bigger side, so it's getting closer toward the mid-range strategies as opposed to just straight aggression. Has a little bit of ability to play kind of a grindier game. There's also a card called the Great Henge, which greatly helps in these kind of grindy-ish games. It's a 9-mana artifact that's 7 and 2 green, but gets reduced in cost for by the highest power in your. So if you're able to land a Steel Leaf Champion or a Ronus, costs you 4 mana, taps for 2 mana and gains 2 life, and then every time you play a creature, you draw a card, gain a life, I think. So that's certainly a card that can help upgrade this archetype, etc. So this archetype is kind of on the fringes of Modern as opposed to a deck like Burn, but it's a deck that if you enjoy playing big green idiots and smashing your opponent's face, you can certainly have some success at the F&M level with this kind of deck. So anyways, this has been John for MTG Nexus with a quick wrap-up of mono green stompy aggro mid-range, whatever you wish to call it. So be back with the stream later tonight.